This is how rulers rose, and how they fell. In a pillared chamber high on the Bursa Hill, the wind from the harbor curls through cedar shutters carrying the mixed smell of tar, salt, and purple dye. Two suffets, Carthage's annually elected chief magistrates, sit on low-backed chairs while a semicircle of elder merchants faces them, each with a wax tablet and a mind full of numbers. A messenger bows, recites the price of grain in Sicily, the mood of Numidian kings inland, the rumor of Roman shipyards hammering on the Tyrrhenian coast. Then a clerk lifts a clay seal impressed with the sign of Tanit and reads the proposal. Finance more hulls, hire more Iberian swords, secure another treaty with the Greeks of Syracuse, raise harbor dues by 1/10. A murmured calculation moves around the benches like a current. In Carthage, power is counted. By ships, by contracts, by copper ingots stacked and restacked on an accountant's floor. And the council's silence before a vote feels less like ceremony than like compound interest poised to grow. Think of Carthage not as a single city, but as a commercial ecosystem spread across the western Mediterranean. Founded by Phoenician settlers from Tyre, it grew on a promontory in modern Tunisia into a trading powerhouse, perfectly placed between Africa, Sicily, Sardinia, and Iberia. Carthaginian merchants ran relay networks, North African grain and olive oil sailing north, Iberian silver and copper going east, Sardinian and Balearic island slingers hire for pay, timber and pitch-feeding shipyards that could launch a fleet faster than most enemies could draft men. This geography explains the political shape. A city led by a mercantile oligarchy, wealthy lineages who financed voyages, controlled warehouses, and expected politics to safeguard business. The suffetes presided over administration and courts. A synod of elders advised on policy. A powerful supervisory board known to Greeks as the 104 audited generals and officials. And a popular assembly could be summoned to ratify treaties or major decisions. The effect was not a monarchy or a mass democracy, but a layered oligarchy, where many had a voice, but few had a deciding weight. That oligarchy managed an unusual choice. It kept most citizens at work in trade and agriculture, while outsourcing much of war to others. Carthaginian fleets were crewed by citizen rowers and pilots, but its armies were a mosaic of mercenaries and subject levies. Libyan infantry in heavy ranks, Numidian light cavalry fast as dust, Iberian swordsmen fierce and flexible, Gaulish warriors, Balearic slingers whose stones broke helmets. This was logical for a trading city. Better to hire fighters than drain the labor that kept ships moving and taxes flowing. But the logic had risks that would someday come due. Mercenaries fight for pay. If pay is late, loyalty is fragile. Generals need autonomy to manage such forces. If oligarchs distrust generals, strategy frays. And citizens far from battlefields are less inclined to accept the costs of long wars, unless ships and markets are visibly at stake. To see how this system worked at its best, watch the council handle Sicily. The island, poised between Italy and Africa, was a perpetual chessboard where Carthage faced Greek city-states, especially Syracuse, for centuries. In those contests, Carthage often moved like a trading company with a navy, secure coastal cities, negotiate with inland rulers, blockade when it's cheaper than fighting, and finance expeditions with clear expectations of profit. When the Greek tyrant Agathocles threatened Africa by landing near Tunis, the Carthaginian response mixed naval interdiction with diplomatic bribes to peel away his allies. When the island turned quiet, Carthaginian officials reset customs duties and reopened trade. The educational point is simple. Carthaginian strategy braided commerce and coercion, using money to create options and ships to make money safe. But an oligarchy is also a stage for factions. In Carthage, two tendencies tugged at policy. On one side, conservative magnates, exemplified in some sources by figures like Hanno, preferred limited wars, low taxes, and the protection of African estates and maritime traffic. On the other, expansionist families, like the Magonids earlier and later the Barcids, saw opportunity in aggressive campaigns, particularly in Iberia where mines could underwrite armies and colonies could be turned into semi-private power bases. The institutions were designed to balance these impulses. Generals answering to senatorial committees, financial audits on return from campaign, and the 104 ready to prosecute overreach. Balance worked, until external pressure made balance feel like paralysis. When Rome entered Sicily in the mid-3rd century BCE, Carthage met a different kind of rival. Rome was not a trading league. It was a citizen republic whose farmers could be levied in vast numbers, whose allies supplied contingents, whose politics rewarded victories more than profits, and whose religion could sanctify stubbornness. The First Punic War began as a quarrel over a Sicilian city and became a laboratory for naval innovation. Rome learned to build quincunxems by copying Carthaginian models and trained crews relentlessly. Carthage's seamanship was superior for much of the war, but storms and strategic misjudgments bled fleets on both sides. When Rome finally won at sea, and Carthage sued for peace, the terms bit deep. Sicily lost. A heavy indemnity owed in annual installments, and most painful to the oligarchs, a blow to the perception that money and maneuver could always preserve the status quo. At home, the bill came due in a way that exposed the system's nerve. Discharged mercenaries, angry over delayed pay and poor treatment, mutinied in Africa, joined by Libyan subject communities tired of heavy exactions. The truceless war that followed was a nightmare. Atrocities on both sides, Carthaginian generals besieged in their own hinterland, and the city forced to wage total war to regain control. Hamilcar Barca eventually crushed the revolt with ruthless skill. But the lesson was not abstract. Outsourcing violence without iron discipline is dangerous. Squeezing subject peoples funds the state but can flip allegiance the moment a challenger appears. The oligarchy survived, and many in Carthage were relieved enough to accept a strategic pivot that would change everything. Hamilcar's move into Iberia. Iberia was Carthage's second wind. There, Hamilcar and his family built a quasi-imperial domain. New towns, alliances with local chiefs, and above all access to silver mines that could pay soldiers and impress creditors. His son-in-law, Hasdrubal the Fair, continued the project with diplomacy and urban planning. His son Hannibal, sworn, according to the later tradition, to eternal enmity toward Rome, took it up with audacity. In Carthage, the Barcid enterprise looked like a gift. A general paying for his own army. Revenues flowing in without raising taxes at home. New markets opened. It also looked like a challenge to senatorial control. A commander too popular abroad to be easily disciplined by committees in the Birsa chamber. Institutions that functioned in peacetime as checks can, in crisis, become veto points or excuses for delay. Hannibal forced the long-deferred decision. By attacking Saguntum, a Roman ally south of the agreed frontier, he made war inevitable on terms of his choosing. His march over the Alps was a logistical miracle and a political message. Carthage could export war onto Italy's soil. For a decade, Hannibal outmaneuvered Roman consuls, annihilating armies at Trebia, Trasimene, and Cannae. Here the Carthaginian model partly worked. Local Italian communities defected to the winning side. Syracuse joined Carthage, and Macedon flirted with alliance. But it also showed limits. Hannibal needed consistent reinforcement, siege equipment to break Rome's network of fortified towns, and a second front in central Italy. The Carthaginian Senate hesitated, diverted resources to defend Spain and Sicily, and relied on the assumption that Rome would eventually negotiate. Rome did not. It rebuilt armies, refused to sue for peace, and found a Fabian rhythm of avoidance and attrition, until Scipio struck back in Iberia, and then in Africa. Why did Carthage fail to capitalize on stunning battlefield success? The educational answer points to structure. Oligarchies, by design, distribute risk and curb mavericks. That works until a crisis demands rapid, unified bets. The council's instinct to preserve capital and protect core interests made it reluctant to underwrite Hannibal's Italian gamble fully, especially when his power base lay in Iberia rather than Africa. Meanwhile, Rome's citizen soldiers, rallied by the promise of land and honor, and by a political culture that sanctified persistence, could endure disasters that would have collapsed a purely mercenary coalition. At Zama, when Scipio brought Numidian cavalry to his side and neutralized Hannibal's elephants, the war's outcome turned on alliances and training as much as on generalship, and Carthage lost the second time to a different mix of Roman strengths. What followed is as instructive as the defeats. Shackled by a new indemnity, stripped of fleet and overseas possessions, Carthage did not collapse. The city leaned into its comparative advantages. Intensive agriculture on African estates. A Carthaginian writer named Mago later became proverbial for agricultural expertise. Trade routed through neighbors' flags and quiet investment in local industry. Without an army worth the name, Carthage relied on diplomacy and punctual payments to keep Rome at bay and Numidian kings in check. The oligarchy that had once financed wars now financed recovery, demonstrating a resilience that astonished observers. But success bred anxiety. Roman politicians, some genuinely fearful of Carthaginian resurgence, others eager for glory, pointed at the city's prosperity as proof of hidden danger. Cato, the elders' ritual warning, Carthage must be destroyed, did not spring from Carthaginian aggression in this period, so much as from Roman unease with a rival that refused to stay poor. Inside Carthage, the old fault lines reappeared. Should the city passively accept humiliations from Numidian neighbors, enforced by Roman arbitration, to preserve peace at any cost? Or should it rearm in defiance of treaties, risking a final confrontation? Oligarchs who remembered the last war's devastation favored caution. Others, stung by repeated border raids and fines, argued that honor and security required action. When Carthage finally fought Numidia without Roman permission, it handed hawks in Rome the pretext they wanted. The Third Punic War began as a punitive expedition and became a siege. Carthaginian courage in the end, melting jewelry for weapons, street-by-street resistance was real but belated. Institutions built to count profits and discipline, generals could not manufacture allies or legions out of air once Rome committed to erasure. In 146 BCE, the city was burned, its population killed or enslaved, and its memory reduced by its conquerors to a cautionary tale. Even in ruin, Carthage teaches clearly. First, institutions fit economies. Carthage's oligarchy grew from trade, councils of merchants are good at making weighted decisions, spreading risk, and tying policy to revenue. That is a strength in normal times. It becomes a weakness when survival requires concentrated, immediate sacrifice for uncertain returns. A citizen-soldier republic like Rome can convert pride and obligation into soldiers and taxes under emergency rules. A mercantile oligarchy struggles to convince shareholders to buy a war that might never pay. Second, reliance on hired force is efficient but brittle. It spares citizens and keeps fields and workshops active. But it introduces a third party between state and violence. Contractors whose loyalty is transactional. As long as money flows and victories come, the system hums. When pay falters or defeats multiply, the armed men become a problem to be solved, not a solution. Third, internal coherence matters as much as external power. The Barcid project in Iberia created wealth and options, yet it also created a divided command structure that the Senate never fully embraced. Carthage could not decide whether it wanted a general with a private empire or an empire without private generals, and it paid for indecision.
Culture, too, has a political dimension. Carthaginian religion centered on Baal Hammon and Tanit. Public vows and sacrifices bound community and elite in shared performance. Greek and Roman writers accuse Carthage, sometimes sensationally, of child sacrifice. The archaeological debate continues, but the politics is plain. Hostile neighbors use moral narratives to justify fear and ultimately conquest. Meanwhile, Carthaginian soft power was real. Its artisans improved shipbuilding. Its agronomists systematized farming. Its merchants spread techniques and contracts across coasts. The city's diaspora, traders from Gades to Motia, carry laws and weights with them, the way Rome's soldiers carried miles of road. Long after its fall, the Roman state rebuilt a colony on the same site. Commerce returned because geography and human networks are stubborn. Let's anchor the lessons in a pair of human moments. Picture a Carthaginian accountant in a warehouse on the commercial island of Kothon, counting amphorae of oil and checking a lead seal. For him, politics is predictability. Tariffs that don't change mid-season, treaties that keep pirates at bay, and courts that enforce a contract across cultures. The oligarchy delivered that for generations, which is why a city became rich. Now picture a Libyan infantryman after the First Punic War, standing outside the city waiting for pay. His loyalty is owed money. When that bond breaks, his anger becomes a weapon in somebody else's hand. An empire that depends on both men, a counter of jars and a carrier of spears, must keep both contracts. Carthage kept the first brilliantly and the second precariously. So, a clear conclusion. Carthage rose because merchants turned geography into strategy. A harbor nation that calculated risk, built incomparable fleets, and ruled through profit as much as through punishment. Its oligarchic institutions, suffets, Senate, 104, were optimized to protect trade, audit power, and avoid rash, costly adventures. Those same features limited the city's ability to wage existential war when faced with a rival that mobilized citizens, bled for victory, and accepted short-term ruin for long-term dominance. When Carthage balanced money with arms, diplomacy with deterrence, it survived disasters and reinvented prosperity. When factional caution throttled strategic coherence, when the bond with hired soldiers snapped, when fear abroad met hesitation at home, the system that had made Carthage wealthy could not save it. The takeaway is not that commerce makes polities weak and war makes them strong.
It is that political design must match strategic environment. A council built to count costs must also be able to decide when costs must be paid without an immediate return. The merchants of power mastered the art of making the sea pay. They failed to master the rare art of making a divided city act like a single will when history demanded it. And that is how rulers in Carthage rose, and at last how they fell.